So what were the group of Christians, the very first group of Christians right after Jesus died, who followed the religion as close to the way that Jesus was following it, peace and blessings be upon him, who understood the rules, the understanding, what God wanted out of us? Those first early Christians, who were they? I always thought it was Paul and his community. But we know that people disagreed with Paul and argued with Paul, and they saw a lot of what he did as blasphemous in that first century of Christianity. And it's true, if you do your research, a lot of people opposed him. So who were the first group of Christians? The answer is it was the Nazarenes. And anybody who's a Christian today, they have to compare their Christianity to the Nazarenes. So let's read about this. This was the first Christian community before Paul of Tarsus. The Nazarenes were the first followers of Jesus, forming a community in Jerusalem immediately after Jesus' death, around 30 CE. This was several years before Paul of Tarsus began his ministry, which likely started around 35 to 40 CE. Paul was born about a year after Jesus, but only became a follower years later. Led by James, Jesus' brother. Now remember, Paul never physically met Jesus. He had a vision. James was actually grew up around Jesus. He knew everything about him. He knew when the people weren't around, who he really was, how he interacted. You know, he should have been the leader of the church, but somehow Paul, because of his eloquency and because he knew how to attract people, Paul became more influential. But James was the person we're supposed to be, those early Christians were supposed to follow. And they just threw him, behind their backs, so to speak. So, led by James, Jesus' brother, the Nazarenes remained deeply rooted in Jewish tradition. The first Christians held on to Jewish belief. So if anybody today is thinking to themselves, yes, I'm a true Christian, yes, I'm doing the right thing, if you're not following any of the Jewish tradition, you're following a different religion, point blank. And the only way to free yourself of this is to follow the prophet that came after Jesus, that Jesus told you about, that another prophet would come. Let's keep reading here. They believed Jesus was the Jewish Messiah, a human anointed by God, but they did not accept the idea that Jesus was divine or the Son of God. This is such a monumental, important thing that nobody's talking about. The first Christians did not worship Jesus. That's what you need to understand. So if you want to be a better Christian, just a better Christian, don't worship Jesus. That's all. They strictly observed Jewish law, including circumcision and Sabbath keeping. And if we read the Bible, we'll see that Jesus actually upheld the law. He even said in Matthew, don't think I come to abolish the law, but to fulfill it. And basically, whoever teaches people to do the least or do away with the least letter of the law will be the least in the kingdom of heaven. This is what Jesus said, and it contracts what Paul said. Paul said, don't worry about what Jesus said or anybody else said, just faith alone. And there's another verse in the Bible that talks about the foolish man who thinks that faith alone is enough. And then it mentioned, was not Abraham justified when he was going to sacrifice his son? And then it talked about a prostitute who she did good deeds, and her good deeds was enough. So monotheism, belief in God and good deeds is enough. This is what the Bible, and you can find those two verses if you search for them. Paul's mission, by contrast, focused on spreading Christianity to Gentiles, non-Jews, teaching that faith in Jesus as a divine Son of God was sufficient for salvation. Paul argued that Gentiles did not need to follow Jewish laws, making Christianity more accessible beyond its Jewish roots. This differed from what Jesus taught completely. James represented the original Jewish Christian faith that maintained full adherence to the Torah, while Paul introduced theological changes that opened Christianity to a wider Greco-Roman world. Go back and read the teachings of James. James died a monotheist. James knew Jesus and still did not accept him as God. I mean, what else proof do you need? The Nazarenes' view of Jesus share important similarities with Islamic teachings found in the Quran. Jesus, Isa, is regarded as a prophet and Messiah, but strictly not divine or the Son of God. Jesus is described as a human messenger chosen by God to guide people. The Quran rejects the traditional Christian view of Jesus' crucifixion, reflecting some early Jewish Christian skepticism about his death. Both Nazarenes and the Quran emphasize strict monotheism, avoiding associating divinity with Jesus. What people don't know today is when Jesus died, Christianity split into hundreds of sects. There were Christians who believed there were 365 gods. There were Christians who believed there were two main gods. There's Christians that believe in three in one. And then there were Christians who were as close to Jesus as possible, who actually knew him and the companions. They were the ones that simply said he was a prophet who had miracles, so we knew he came from God, just like Abraham and all the other prophets, and that was it. He was just a prophet. That is the correct understanding. You have to read this book, Lost Christianities by Bert Ehrman. I can't put it down. He breaks down what the first century of Christians actually did. And nobody asked that. Everybody thinks the Christianity we have today is a Christianity that was always around. But what they don't understand is the first Bible came about 300 years after Jesus, and Christian practices were already developing. So the Bible came out of Christianity. Christianity did not come out of the Bible. And you might not understand that statement out of ignorance, because in 325, Christian thought and doctrine was chosen, not research, because Christians were divided into so many sects and they were arguing about, hey, was Jesus God? Was he the Son of God? What was he? And the leadership was like, look, we ain't got time for all these arguments. So we're just going to choose what it is. And from this going forward is what Christianity will be. But what they don't understand was there were all these different opinions. Just like what gospels were accepted into the Bible, there's so many more gospels. And some of them were more authentic than the ones Matthew, Luke, Matthew, and John. So it's nothing like people think it is today. You have to do research, and once you read this book and you understand, then you will understand where Islam comes into play and how when Jesus talked about another prophet would come, it makes sense. But it won't make sense to follow Muhammad. It will be peace and blessings be upon him. It seems like a ridiculous foreign concept until you really understand that the first Christians actually practiced something that was very similar to Islam. It sounds ridiculous to say that until you do some research. But if you want to find the truth and you want to die a monotheist and not a person who follows polytheism, read this book and then go read the clear Quran. And there's no alternative except to accept Islam, I promise you.